I'm going to start off with a little bit of history. How did the leather community as we know it today get started? Well, going back to World War II, and obviously the Korean War and the Vietnam War. So many times when men and women got out of the service, they found they couldn't go back home to Sheboygan. You know, they just didn't fit in that little town anymore. So oftentimes they stayed near the bases where they got out of the service. Over on the other side here, we had all those women that went to work in the Boeing factories and all over as Rosie the Riveters. Found out there is a life outside the house. So in the late 40s and into the 50s, you had this movement of people going away from the family and standing out on their own. Those that served in the service particularly formed little groups, bands of brothers. There was this culture of discipline, this culture of command, of lineage, of respect and honor and trust. Because back then, you had to be very careful about your sexuality. And if you were a sexual outlaw that was into rough sex, you know, the mainstream here didn't want to even deal with that. You had to depend on your buddy because you had to keep the secret. And if you've ever been in a military unit, you know you have to be able to trust your buddy next to you because your life depends on this. So it was the same way in the leather community that gradually started forming in these cities. You know, it'd be a small circle, 10, 15 people. Nowadays, you may hear it referred to as a family, a circle, a clan, a tribe. These were little support groups. And in the late 50s, early 60s, you started seeing groups form, mostly around the bike community. Because if you remember from your movies, James Dean and all that, in the late 50s, early 60s, we had a biker movement where the free riding clubs, not so much the Hollywood movies of the 60s that were the bikers, that little craziness, but little groups that would go riding. These groups gradually formed in traditions. Our first group, which is known as the Border Riders, was formed in 1969. It still exists today, covering Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland. You know, they ride here out of Seattle on the third Sunday, and they meet at the Cuff on a regular basis. They're the second oldest group in the country, bike club. The oldest is Avatar in LA. Many things from the bike culture came into the leather community. One is the back patch. Club colors, your unit insignia, again, keeping with the military. This is how you identify. And God forbid you go into a fight with your colors on. How many of those old movies did you see them take off their vest and hand their vest to someone, or take off their uniform when they went to get in a fight? You took off the uniform, you did not disrespect your colors. Same thing for the leather community. So all this kept moving forward. The clubs started forming. Then the bars started happening. Our first leather bar, well, one of our early leather bars was the 614, which David mentioned earlier. We had others. We had Johnny's Handlebar down on First Avenue, which later became the Vogue, which later moved up the hill. You had the Marshal's office, the Axle Rock, the Pen, which is now where Cupcake Royale is. Before there was a small fire. One of the owners thought the insurance was paid. There was even a bar in 1977 in the Central District, a leather bar at 27th and Union, you know, called the Branding Iron. It lasted a year. There was no signage on the outside, but people were welcome there. It was a home. It was a safe place. You know, so we had these bars. the club started developing. Our second club in Seattle, leather-oriented club, was the Knights of Malta, now known as the Knights of Mantra, a Levi leather club, which actually spread and had chapters throughout the West, including Spokane. Yeah, being from Eastern Washington, I can joke about Spokane. I'm a Yakamanian. So we started seeing culture develop. Then we had other clubs such as Seattle Dungeon Guild, which had rented a space up here on Pike, now known as Lobby. It's amazing how much of our history is built on our sites. Rebar, that's the old Axle Rock and Sparks. Sparks was a Levi leather bar, followed briefly for 6 months by S, which was a women's SM bar, until they got shut down by the Liquor Control Board because one of their theatrical productions was too graphic. We have a long history of politics with authorities. In the 60s, the bars were paying off the police. We had a corrupt police force. The chief of police and half of his sergeants and officers were removed. Things got better. We had a mayor, Mayor Royer, who was really active and naturally would be supportive of our events. I can remember Roseanne Royer, the mayor's wife, tending bar at the J&L for an AIDS fundraiser. Think of it, the mayor's wife tending bar in a leather bar. That's kind of unheard of here. We've also had police raids, liquor board issues. I can remember times when we go to do an underwear party at the old Tugs Belltown and the liquor board harassing. And there was a gentleman whose birthday was yesterday who was also a state senator, Cal Anderson, who showed up in his underwear and said, "Come get me." Cal was a fun gentleman that would show up at a leather contest and we'd be raffling off something like a harness. He would model it. One time he won a tattoo. So the next event, he proudly showed us where the tattoo was. That was why many of us referred to Cal as St. Cal. And yesterday was his birthday. So happy birthday to Cal. And incidentally, our new mayor, who succeeded Cal in the House and Senate, was also his birthday yesterday too. But we have had issues with liquor board. Encore, they wouldn't let us, nipples. Artwork, nipples, male nipples on artwork, oh my God, there's a problem. Because all of our liquor laws are based on strip clubs. It's all written to prevent strip clubs having liquor. You got to remember that the Seattle history going back to the 1800s was built on good government, and the next year they would be a little bit more free. Back and forth, back and forth. And we actually had an organization started here, 1893, I think it was. It was called the Fraternal Order of Good Things. Many of you, your parents belonged to that organization known as the Eagles. It was an association of peep show operators. Little did they know, little did my parents know what they belonged to, how it got started. So our communities have grown. Sexual outlaws. That's what leather is. We get whitewashed, we get mainstreamed, but Seattle has always been out there. We've had a lot of incredible leaders, people that have helped start Northwest AIDS Foundation, Chicken Soup. And Chicken Soup did not start out as an AIDS organization, by the way. It started as a hepatitis support group. They passed a can at Volunteer Park at Pride. And Josh Joshua and Carol Sterling took it forward. And Chicken Soup grew, and it's a wonderful organization. But Josh was a Leatherman. You don't hear about Josh. You hear about Carol, because Carol survived. Josh passed. Billy Jefferson, the first Seattle Mr. Leather, 1986, founding member of Northwest AIDS Foundation, ran the safety campaigns. We used to have a little safety button that every couple months a new one would come out with a little saying. It was a traffic sign with the S, meaning safe sex. How many, you all go to the bars and pick up condoms. They're in most of the bathrooms. Where did that get started? A group called Bartenders Against AIDS, headed up by Ken Gordon, Seattle Mr. Leather 87, bartender at the Eagle, then known as the J&L. I was bartending out at a little bar out in Wallingford called the Bus Stop. You now know it as Changes for the last 20 years. And I would pick up 2,000 condoms every Thursday, and we'd go out and distribute them to the bars. That was funded by the tips. There was no government doing things. That was the people, us caring for our brothers and sisters, blood sisters. The lesbians organized as blood drives because we were not allowed to donate blood to help our brothers. There's a lot of building back and forth within our community. There's a lot of education that came out of Seattle. In 1986, we had a group started by 9 people, 9 men and women. It became the National Leather Association. Went on to become a national movement. And in 2 months, organized a national leather conference of a style that had never been done before. And they did it at Seattle Center. Leather taking over Seattle Center. Renting space. Oh my God. It was rather interesting walking through the center in full leather in daylight. And this little conference we put together in 2 months. People in San Francisco, New York, LA, Chicago said, Seattle, you guys can't do this. We didn't know we couldn't, so we did. And, things like that. That conference format is now the standard around the country. There's little things that Seattle has done. Safety issues, blood safety. There are some people in the community that do blood play with needles. I remember 91, a gentleman running for Seattle, Mr. Leather, did a fantasy scene involving play piercing. And those are the needles, temporary needles put in to reduce the endorphins. And it was a very artistic scene. And it was done on stage, everything done properly. And the next week, the letters to the SGN, page after page, till George said no more. The thing is, it had all been done safely because we had a lesbian who had organized what was known as C-Space. C stands for consensual. And it was a monthly educational forum that the men and women of leather got together and learned how to do stuff safely and with consent, with respect. And I have to say on the needle issue, about a year later, we were up in Vancouver. A couple of us went up there to help put on a theatrical show, one of the bars at the Shaggy. And it was a half-hour production. During this scene, one of the needles popped. When I say pop, we always put a little cap on the end so no one else would get poked because safety. One popped, every single Seattle person in that room reacted. People came out, the sharps container came out, the people were held back, gloves came out. And I turned to LD and said, we did it right. That is it's one of those moments that when you realize that the education that you have been doing out there in the community has sunk in. And the Vancouver people are like, huh? They had a long ways to go. It's one of those little defining moments that makes you great gratitude. So that's a little bit about where the leather community came from here. Now, I'm going to touch on another subject. I'm talking about history. Hanky Code. Came out of San Francisco in the late 60s. The key thing in is there were 10 basic colors. Not the esoteric list, because, I'm sorry. I can't tell the difference between those two shades of red in a bar. However, if I see left or I see right, I can always walk up to them and say, hey, what color hanky is that? My God, you're actually talking to them in person. Because you can't use, you got a light, and what your sign went out many decades ago. That is the important thing of a hanky. Yes, it's an advertisement. It doesn't mean you have to do that, but it's a conversation starter. And it's not grind or scruff. Talk to them in person. But there was 10 basic colors. And at early days, it was a little bit different on the East Coast. It was on the other side. So it got very confusing, which also I wanted to bring up a little history note there. In the 60s and 70s, there wasn't as much travel. It was in the late 70s, you start having national magazines. So other than Pulp Fiction, you really had no national news of note to the leather community. The organizations and newsletters were just getting started. The Advocate, I think, was 69. So you really did not have as much communication between city to city. The leather community is made up of many different traditions. There is no one true tradition because you didn't have the communication. But what you did have is someone would travel down to Portland and come back with an idea or a new way of doing something or a new skill. And they would teach their circle. And then someone would go up to Vancouver. So as a rule, the traditions vary by region, but there is no one true way, regardless of what some people on the internet will tell you. We all celebrate Christmas, but I can tell you very much that it's celebrated a little different up here than it is down in Atlanta. It depends on where you're at and what traditions you were raised with. But we're also not afraid to change those traditions. So, enough on that rant. Our organizations have grown. Our communities have grown. We've gotten diverse. It's because of people like Victor, Billy Jefferson, Ken Gordon, Cookie Andrews Hunt, that are willing to take a chance, take a stand, try something new. Sometimes we don't know we can't do it, so we just do it. That is what the challenge I present to you. I was challenged by many of my mentors, Steve Madoff, George Nelson, Billy Jefferson, Lee Willis, to be outgoing, to give to my community, to support my community, but above all, to be a mentor. And by being a mentor, it means that you are there answering questions, giving a hand, giving a shoulder, sometimes a swift kick in the butt, because we all need that now and then. But by being there, that is a way of building community. And the leather clubs have changed themselves. They are still bands of brothers. And on the leather clubs, so many of them had to change in the 80s when we lost the majority of our community. David, I know you know what I'm talking about. When every time we turned around, somebody was gone. And the clubs started massively fundraising to take care of our brothers because no one else would. You didn't have any government support. You had to raise money. You had to take care of your brother or your sister, because the women were dealing with all kinds of issues themselves with the cancers and all that. But together we got through it. But we lost a generation of leadership. Many communities, small communities, each had a leather club. You saw those communities go from 30 people to 5. You know, we managed to keep going because of the love, because of the support, because of reaching out to people. So again, the challenge to each of you is, how do you reach out to the community? How do you support the community? Your attendance here today is a start in that direction. So again, my challenge to you is reach out, support, but do it with honor, trust, and respect. Thank you.